Wisdom with Scott Allen.
Hello, I am your host, Scott Allen, and this is Phronesis, Practical Wisdom for Leaders. If the topic is leadership, I'm in. I've spent more than 20 years in the field teaching, learning, writing, and questioning. When I'm not working on Phronesis, I travel, delivering keynotes, working with individuals and teams, and helping people from organizations across industries become better leaders. Want to learn more? Visit me at scottjallen.net. Phronesis offers a smart, fast-paced discussion about all things leadership. We explore relevant topics and incorporate practical tips to help you make a difference in how you lead and live. Listen Notes lists Phronesis in the top 3% of podcasts worldwide. Phronesis is the official podcast of the International Leadership Association. ILA brings together those who teach, study, and develop leadership, advancing leadership knowledge and practice for a better world. Learn more at ila-net.org. Finally, if you enjoy Phronesis, please subscribe to stay current on our weekly episodes. If you find an episode that resonates, please share it with your colleagues and friends. And if you want more content, subscribe to my newsletter, The Leader's Edge. The link is in the show notes. As always, thanks for listening. And now, here's today's show.
Okay, everybody, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for checking in wherever you are in the world. Today, I have a returning guest that I always love having a conversation with. I have Dr. Ron Riggio, and his bio is in the show notes. Ron, from sunny California. Scott, in a snowy, cold Northeast Ohio. I wish I was 70 and sunny right now, sir. How are you?
Yeah. It's beautiful. It's beautiful here. And I'm stuck inside, so like you.
Yes. You wrote a Psychology Today, and we're going to put a link in the show notes for listeners. And I want you to make sure you click on those because Ron has a blog that he has on Psychology Today. And he posts about that on LinkedIn, and it's prolific. It's awesome. And you can double click and you always get 5 or 10 minute read and just enough to be dangerous on a topic. So Ron had done a post on social intelligence, and that's where we're going to take the conversation today. I have not had a conversation about this, Ron, but I think sometimes, at least Mr. Bayatzis and company, they have the ESCI. They lump emotional and social intelligence together. And in your article, you'd said, look, no, EI is a subset of social intelligence. And so I'm so excited to have this conversation. Haven't explored this topic on this podcast. So what are a few things that folks need to know about social intelligence? Incredibly important for leadership.
Let's deal first with that EISI, emotional intelligence, social intelligence. The reason I say that emotional intelligence is a subset of social intelligence is that you only learn about emotions for the most part, except for tapping into your inner feelings. But most of what we learn about emotions and communicating emotionally occurs in a social context. We recognize other people's facial expressions and goes from there. When we're infants, the mother's smiling and the infant smiles back, right? And eventually you learn these emotions. So this realm of sort of social learning, social intelligence covers the whole thing. And to think about this in like a Venn diagram form, you can think of general intelligence, the whole realm of intelligence, as this big circle, and embedded in there is social intelligence. Embedded in there is another circle, emotional intelligence. Those overlap a lot.
Okay.
But if you think about what is social intelligence, and a lot of this, if you want to translate it into lay terms, we can talk about somebody who has street smarts, right? They know what to do in different situations. Or tactfulness or social related common sense, right? So social intelligence, and it's very complex, but it's like knowing how to be and knowing what to do in social situations.
I'm not saying the wrong joke in the wrong context. I'm not being awkward when it's engaging in the dialogue. I can move in and out of and be appropriate for the context. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. And part of that is understanding what the social contexts are And that's where it really gets into intelligence and it's experience based. And so let's shift it. Psychologists and folks in social sciences are talking about all kinds of intelligence. And if you think about cultural intelligence, how do you develop cultural intelligence? You interact with other cultures.
Yeah.
So how do you develop social intelligence? You interact in social situations. You try to put yourself in different social situations. You spend a lot of time reading social situations, learning as you go along. So I have this model that I've been using, and I have an instrument that kind of assesses it. And it looks at both sort of emotional side, the emotional intelligence side, and the social intelligence side. Now, I know a lot of my colleagues that are psychologists, they don't like to use the term emotional intelligence. And when that happened, I considered that a leap because I was working in the area of what we called emotional skills.
Yeah.
But to then leap to intelligence, and so the purest psychologists say emotional intelligence isn't the same thing as G is intelligence, which is the firing of your neurons, right?
Yeah.
But if we take this emotional skill approach and break this down, the model I use is relatively simple. It's like communication 101. There's only 3 things you can do. You can send a message that's expressing yourself. You can receive that, which I call sensitivity, picking up on other people, and you can regulate and control. And there's all this stuff on emotional regulation. So on the emotional side, emotional expressiveness, that's being able to express emotions. You can do that spontaneously, or I'm always amazed at the actors who can cry on cue.
Yes.
So you can enact it, or it could be natural. If we talk about emotional sensitivity, that's being able to read other people's emotions, pick up on those, related to empathy. Emotional control, that's the ability to regulate your emotions. But beyond that, it's regulating the expression of emotions. And we'll see how these things relate to leadership, because I know this is really, we want to eventually come around to leadership. Now, on the flip side, parallel to that, social expressiveness, that's your ability to communicate, to talk, to speak spontaneously, or prepared speeches. Social sensitivity, or it's your ability to listen and to decode what other people are saying, the subtle nuances. But it's also your ability to read social situations, really complex. And then social controllers, or regulating your own social behavior. So I worked with David Funder, who's a famous personality psychologist. And when we started talking about the core of social intelligence, your ability to express yourself, your ability to read social situations, enact social roles, we were sitting there talking, and he said, I have a sort of a prototype of somebody who's really good at that. And I have that in my mind. And I said, I have one in my mind too. And he said, mine's not a real person. And I said, yeah, mine's not either. It's James Bond. And the idea is, if you think about that idea of knowing how to be and knowing how to fit in, and there's a kind of a famous scene in one of the Bond movies. I'm not sure which James Bond it was, who the actor was, but you see him in a jumpsuit up in a plane, and he's getting ready to skydive. And he skydives down onto the deck outside the swimming pool. And inside it's a mansion, and there's a party going on. And so James comes down, and he unzips his suit, and he's got a tuxedo on underneath. And the last thing, he pulls out a carnation and the boutonniere and puts it in his lapel and walks into the party like he was there all along. So that ability to know how to be, and David Funder called it savoir-faire, which translates to knowing how to be. So we wrote a chapter on this idea of savoir-faire. What is it?
Yeah. My daughters love Saturday Night Live. So usually Sunday morning, later in the morning, we will turn on last night's Saturday Night Live. And this week, I'll send it to you, and I'll put a link in the show notes for listeners. There was a skit that was all about literally everything you just said. And this individual was doing the opposite. And that's what was funny, because the person was reading 0 cues, had no clue how they were showing up, had no clue how others were reacting to her in this skit. And of course, that's funny. The challenge is sometimes it's not funny when you're in organizational life
Yeah.
and you're leading and you're managing and you have a leader or a manager or a person in a position of authority who struggles with this, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a friend of mine, Bernie Carducci, passed away a few years ago, but he took over research on shyness from Phil Zimbardo, who wrote a book on shyness. And Bernie said there's really two kinds of shy people. One type of shy person is the traditional shy, they're withdrawn and all that. The other shy person is the person who is hypersensitive to reading social cues, but not very good at enacting their own social behavior. And so they become like social wallflowers. They're watching everything, but it really is this issue of they're so self-conscious that they don't put themselves out there. And so they watch and they analyze and they know what's going on. They're good at reading, but they're not good at expressing themselves. And in my model of social skills, and we have an inventory that measures it, you got to be in balance too. You got to have these things in balance. It's not enough to just possess high levels of being able to read other people's cues or being able to express yourself. Because if you overexpress yourself, then you're dominating the social situation. You're not turning off your emotions. You get into a Robin Williams kind of thing where he can't stop him. He just keeps going.
Yes. I was watching an interview with Tony Robbins this weekend, and it's almost like he has that same he just gets going. In the interview, the interviewer couldn't get like a word in because he just went.
Yeah. That maybe jumps a little bit into leadership. So, okay, if we look at all of these skills, so we all want to be good at the emotional side of communication. We want to have emotional intelligence. We tell leaders they need to have that. The social intelligence side, what is the social intelligence side? It's being able to speak, being able to articulate, being able to take a vision that you might have and bring it down into words, into phrases, into mottos and memes that are going to resonate with the people that you're leading. So that expressive skills. It's also being able to read the situations. It's effective listening. You need to have that. If we talk about the element of what I call social control, but that's really the social role-playing skill. Being a leader, being a manager, it's a social role. Yeah. And you have to learn how to play that role. If we combine your ability to express yourself, the knowledge of social situations, that sort of sensitivity, and that regulation, then we get into impression formation. How do you act in a particular situation? How do you express enough emotion or give enough information, but also listen to what other people are telling you? And so it really is this sort of basic communication skill that we're talking about. One of the things that we found is, and we didn't do this longitudinally, we did it cross-sectionally, but we looked at the possession of these skills and the level of different managers, right? From CEOs all the way to frontline supervisors. And we started noticing something, that their ability to express themselves verbally, the sort of social expressiveness, tended to go up. That ability to play roles tended to go up the higher they were in the hierarchy. But there was something that went down as they went higher in the hierarchy. And what do you think that one thing was? And here's a hint. When you ask the followers of the person, what do you like best about your leader? My leader's a great spokesperson for the group. My leader really looks like a leader or whatever. What's your one complaint?
They don't listen.
They don't listen. And so what we found was that social sensitivity, that ability, that listening skill dropped as they went higher.
Wow.
And so my colleague, Susan Murphy, I think we had a differentiation about, or a disagreement about what was causing it. And she said, maybe we just select bad listeners or something. And I said, maybe it's atrophy. Maybe they spend so much time talking that they're always on stage and the listening sort of atrophies. They maybe were better listeners early on.
Yeah. I certainly think of that when it comes to Tony, because something he just turns on and it's a machine that's just going.
Yeah.
And it's just really interesting to observe because if you're paying close attention, you can tell the interviewer is trying to jump in. So
Yeah.
either he's not seeing it and isn't aware of it because he's so in the zone, but as he says, he'll go for 12 hours and he's just talking the whole time. It's him. It's his.
Yeah.
So who knows, right? That's so interesting.
Yeah, if you look at that, you'll see that too in like really successful talk show hosts. There's some of them that are just really good. They're listening exactly to whatever the person they're interviewing is saying, and they integrate and they reflect on it. And then other ones, there's just performing and just giving lip service to it, and you can see that going on.
Yeah. Okay, two things come to mind for me. You can take them both or neither.
Okay.
I know that you've done a lot of work in some of the longitudinal research on families. How much of this is learned? So just what, and there may be specific studies you can cite, or just what's your assumption? And then I'd love to go to authenticity a little bit. Obviously, I don't walk around my house talking like this and hey,
Yeah.
So we step into roles sometimes, and I'm trying to be as authentic as possible. You're getting a very authentic version of me. I'm excited to have this conversation. I find it fascinating. But there are places where we are a little bit more animated. We are a little bit more quote unquote on than maybe what rolls out of bed at the beginning of each day. So how do you think about that? So those are two questions that are just on my mind.
Yeah. So the first, the sort of longitudinal thing is clearly a lot of this is learned. Now, there may be some genetic predispositions. We talk about people maybe high on sort of an emotionality trait, or we can talk about introverts and extroverts. And actually, we've done some research on that. So when we talk about expressiveness, is it really just extroversion? Is it just extroverts are better at expressing? And they do have an advantage because of that sort of, we assume that extroversion, introversion is genetic. But what we found was that extroversion, this actually relates to leadership. There's an extroversion advantage, but we know that there are a lot of introverts who become effective leaders.
Yes.
And when we did this in our longitudinal, now this is, some of the people are actual leaders, but this is just general population. When we put the social skills, the interpersonal skills into the equation, the extroversion advantage to leadership, extroverts having an advantage to emerge as the leader, it disappears when you put the interpersonal skills in there.
Wow.
So the idea is that extroverts may have an advantage to attain a leadership position, but if introverts develop these interpersonal skills, the advantage disappears.
Yeah.
So there is a genetic component, but most of it is learned, just a lot of things. And we know this because what are some of the kind of hot techniques or hot interventions that they're using to develop leadership communication skills? They're doing things like improv classes, right?
Yep.
What's improv? Improv is I'm listening to what you're saying and I'm adding to it. It really is a very verbal social intelligence kind of skill that we're talking about.
Yeah.
All right. The other issue of authenticity, which is a tricky one, okay? And I actually wrote a blog post, and the picture of the blog post is James Bond, right? It's, I think, Sean Connery. And I called it the dangerous art of impression management.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is that from a leader's perspective, it is a dangerous art because you want to be authentic, but you can't always just say what you're thinking.
Yeah.
You can't always, let's take emotions. You can't wear your heart on your sleeve because sometimes you're going to interact with people under emotional situations in a crisis, right?
Yeah.
There's a great example of where you've got to put your own emotions in check and present that calm, cool exterior. Now, you're being inauthentic because you're scared as, I'm thinking of that Seinfeld episode where George Costanza tramples the old ladies and the children trying to get out of the house on fire or whatever. You can't do that in a leadership. So the reality is leaders have to think about this. How much do you want to control the persona, the way other people view you, but you also want to be authentic.
Yeah.
And so it really is tough. It's a delicate balance. But you can't always, when we think about authenticity, there's a difference between transparency and authenticity. Transparency is you say exactly what's on your mind. And we know that doesn't work, right?
No. I also, a close cousin to this conversation would be like strategic vulnerability. I can be just completely an open book and vulnerable. But again, when I'm in this role, is that appropriate for the situation, the context?
Right. And that's the critical thing. It's about what's the context, your knowledge. This is why social intelligence is so fantastically complex. It's your knowledge of these people that you're leading, and what do they want to see in you? How much do they want to see the true feelings, the true inner feelings? And how much do they want to be led by somebody that they have faith in? We all have doubts and insecurities or whatever, but do you want to express those when you're in a leadership position? And how much do you want to show that vulnerability?
Yeah. What else on social intelligence that you want listeners to just have in mind as they think about this topic and explore it a little bit more? Anything that comes to mind for you?
Yeah, if we think about this, let's break this down into what are some of the things that you can do. So you can work on your conversational skills, and that's networking. I think of my colleague, Jay Conger. He's always encouraging people, become a better networker, become better at conversations. On the flip side, learn to read what's going on, learn to be able to read social situations, to ask questions. We can talk about effective listening skills. So these are all the things that we're telling leaders to do, but how are they related? They're all related because they're elements of this ability to communicate with people, this sort of social intelligence. Work on the role playing, right? One of the things we know is people who are really high on that role playing skill, they have higher sort of sense of self-efficacy. Self-esteem. Why do they have higher sort of social self-esteem? Because they know they can do it. They know they can play these roles, and that's really important for managers. The impression management skills that we've been talking about, those kinds of things. And so, how do you develop these things? It's not easy, right? But it's practice. It's challenging yourself. When we talk about learning conversational skills or learning prepared presentations, Toastmasters or different speaking groups or things like that, you can take courses in effective listening. So there are some programs that you can do or classes that you can sign up for. Talked about the improv thing. I think that's a big deal right now. They're saying, oh, go take an improv course. Why? Teaches you conversational skills.
Exactly. Even this podcast, this will probably come out, I don't know which episode specifically, Ron. It'll probably be my 325th conversation. For 5 years, I've opened up the Zoom and how do I connect and how do I engage in a conversation? I have to listen. I have to be engaged. I have to be present, as mindful as possible. And that's practice. So it's interesting because there's all kinds of places for networking, for instance. I probably have 2 or 3 networking conversations every week. And that just might be someone I haven't spoken with in a period of time. That might be a coffee with an old friend. That might be someone I've never met. And it might be a phone call. It might be a lunch. But to your point, and for listeners, this is not egotistical, I just feel like I can sit down with anyone and have a conversation at this point. And I always have a couple things in mind. I'm either going to learn or I'm going to find a connection point, and then it's just easy. So if I sit down with someone and they say, I love the Buffalo Bills, I know nothing about the Buffalo Bills, but I do know now to say, oh, tell me about their season. How's it going? And then I learn, and I'm genuinely interested in learning about them and their passion. So I'll listen and I'll engage in a conversation. Or I find that someone, like one of our earliest conversations, I learned that you love music. Boom, we're in. We'll go and we will connect there. And then it just flows. So I'm always learning or connecting. And I just learned that over time in 53 years. I'm probably, for listeners, on the introversion side of things. In my 20s, I would have been deathly afraid of this conversation, but I've put myself in that situation over and over to develop those skills.
Yeah, and you've gotten better at it, because of the practice, and that's the idea. And it really is hard. And in fact, I know you're better at it than I am. I'm better at I spend more time thinking about what I'm going to be saying and maybe not so much time listening, but you've had to because of your podcast. And so if I were going to to become a better listener, I would switch roles with you because it would force me to do something that maybe I'm not as good at.
Yeah.
And you are good at that. I've noticed that because I listen to a lot of your podcasts, and you really do listen. And there is that sort of thirst for knowledge that drives your questioning that keeps the conversation rolling. And so it's a good skill. And so we can we want to talk about, I just was playing poker, and I have some friends who are pretty good poker players. And if you think about that, think about the social intelligence of poker and how it relates to general intelligence. So first you got to be smart because you got to know what all the card combinations are and you got to know all that. But then, and really good poker players can pretty much guess what hand you have, which is amazing. But how are they doing it? It's a sort of an algorithm. They're like a little computer.
Yep.
And the algorithm is what cards are out there on the table, what cards are left in the deck, but also reading all those cues. Are you nervous? Are you excited? Can I tell you have a good hand or a bad hand? Can I tell you're bluffing? It's extremely complex but what do these poker players do? They play a lot and they learn this and they make sure they get feedback. So it's complex.
Can you imagine? Like football players watch the game film, the poker players watching their game film.
Yeah. You know what? Where poker got on TV was when they show you the whole cards, the little cameras, and it changed the whole thing. Now people are going, they're trying to guess, is he going to be able to guess what hand that person has? But those of us in the audience were cheating. We get to see.
Ron, I am so thankful for your time today. I really am. And for listeners, I want you to know that there's some links in the show notes. So please make sure that you subscribe to Ron's blog. Pay close attention on LinkedIn when he's posting that a new article is out. Even the classic articles that you've posted a couple times, I will go back into and just refresh. And for listeners, it's always evidence-based. And you have an individual here who knows the literature better than I don't know who else in the world. I can't think of a person. So it's just wisdom. It's wisdom. And he has been studying this topic for many years. So as we close out today, Ron, I've changed up the final question. What's the practical wisdom for listeners?
I think the practical wisdom is, and maybe the practical wisdom in this time of AI and all of this, is to make the human connection and really focus on that and to put yourself out there and work on developing, because this is the most rewarding part of human life, is connecting with other people, being there for people. Earlier I talked about empathy. We didn't get down that path, but that's really important when it comes to relationships and also with leadership. Everybody's talking about they want their leaders to have empathy, right? They want leaders to be able to understand where they're coming from.
I really appreciate your time today. And I think this is just such a fun topic, an important topic. And again, for listeners, we have a lot in the show notes for you. As always, Ron, until next time, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Scott.
You have just finished another episode of Practical Wisdom for Leaders with Scott Allen. To contact me, visit scottjallen.net or send me a note at scott@scottjallen.net. I'm also on LinkedIn, so let's connect. If you have feedback, I'd love to hear it. And as always, thank you so much for listening. And now here's my daughter, Emily, with the outro.
You've been listening to Phronesis, Practical Wisdom with Scott Allen.